Welcome to Better Humanhood, where we build a better world by building better people. We have to live on the planet and we have to live with other people. We have conversations about making that a wonderful proposition.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Better Humanhood. Today we are continuing our series on happiness. Hope you got something out of part one. I think the big thing in there was the chemicals. The most interesting to me anyway is the science behind it. I'd say I don't know why I didn't go into science in college, but I absolutely do. It turns out I'm terrible at application. I'm really good at the theory and the research and all that stuff, but don't make me actually do anything. My father always says, he handed me a screwdriver, I drank it. I'm a little better than that, but not much. So, to recap, we talked a little bit about what it looks like in the brain. Found out that it's not something you can systematize. It's just so subjective. We'll never be able to name a thing that makes everybody happy. We'll do that next week. We'll look at some of the things that make us happy. It turns out that the when of happiness is very interesting. You might be smiling now, but what are you happy about? Is it even the thing you think it is? We'll see. If we have a shred of cosmic gratitude, writes Steven Pinker in Enlightenment now, we should be happier than we used to be. An American in 2015, he continues, compared with his or her counterpart of a half century earlier, so that's 2015 versus 1965, lived 9 years longer, have had 3 more years of education, earn an additional $33,000 a year per family member, and have an additional 8 hours a week of leisure. Think about that. 50 years, that's probably your grandparents to you. And for me, had my first kid at 42, so won't even be that. It'll be, me being, 60, my kid being 18, right? That's almost that whole 50 years. 9 years of lifespan added, more education, $33,000 a year more. That's a lot of money on average. That's not gap, that's average. And 8 more leisure hours a week. That's only going to get better, particularly with our health and longevity. Pankaj Mishra goes back even further in Age of Anger. He notes that in 1919, relatively few people could become disenchanted with modernity because only a tiny minority had actually enjoyed the opportunity to become enchanted with it in the first place. So 50 years ago, we were earning less, we had less time on our hands, we were living shorter lives, we had less education. 100 years ago, all this boredom that we get an opportunity to have, people didn't have that opportunity. Be happy with what you have. A century ago, we didn't have the luxury of being bored with what we have because we didn't have anything. Most especially the leisure time to get bored. For the first time, he writes, people understand themselves in public life primarily as individuals with rights, desires, and interests. But our happiness doesn't even relate to our own pasts, never mind the pasts of those we never knew a century or a half century ago. Especially not the past of hypothetical people who were average in their times. So you might be able to compare yourself to your parents or your grandparents, but you probably didn't really know anybody older than that. If you did, you didn't really have a sense of what they were like when they were your age, right? So it's hard to see how we can be happy relative to them. I mean, we're barely happy, relative to how we were, last week or last month or 20 years ago. Rollo writes in Man's Search for Meaning about people in the mid-20th century, particularly in America. We'd had 2 world wars in 35 years. The stock market collapsed. There was a Cold War coming. We were sure that there was a 3rd World War with atom bombs around the corner. Totalitarianism, fascism around the world. I mean, people had Lenin and Stalin on the mind. They had Mussolini. They had Hitler. They had, and then Castro and the Soviet Union. No wonder people were anxious. How could they be happy? Now we have to make it. Now we have to make that stuff up. Now we're just fighting on Twitter. We actually have an episode coming up in a few weeks on first world problems, as we call them. On the deepest level, Rollo writes, on the deepest level, the question of which age we live in is irrelevant. The basic question is how the individual, in his own awareness of himself and the period he lives in, is able, through his decisions, to attain inner freedom and to live according to his own inner integrity. More on that next time. I want to talk about the future. We're going to revisit our friend Dan Gilbert here. The greatest achievement of the human brain, he writes, is its ability to imagine objects and episodes that do not exist in the realm of the real. It's this ability that allows us to think about the future. Let's break that down a little bit. The greatest achievement of the human brain is its ability to imagine objects and episodes that do not exist in the realm of the real. Because we can conceive of unicorns and Harry Potter and Star Wars. Because we can conceive of that, we can imagine the future. We're the only animal that does that. If you've ever had a dog, they go for everything now. They don't think, oh, I'll just have dinner later. If you present really any animal with food, there's always the threat that it gets taken away. So most of them will eat it now, except cats. They're little psychos who just, if I get hungry, I'll go find something to kill. Anyway, I love cats too, but they're psychos. Forestalling pleasure, Gilbert continues, is an inventive technique for getting double the juice from half the fruit. Some events are even more pleasurable to imagine than to experience. Gilbert goes on to write about a study involving a fancy dinner. Thinking about the future can be so pleasurable that sometimes we'd rather think about it than get there. When participants in the study were told they wanted dinner at a fancy French restaurant and asked when they would like to go, most opted for a week. They not only got to spend several hours actually eating oysters and sipping good wine, but they got to think about it for a whole week beforehand. So they had the pleasure of imagining themselves eating well and drinking well before actually doing it. I think restaurants do that with reservations sometimes. They encourage reservations, but a lot of times you make reservations and you go and you definitely could have gotten a table. But if you make reservations ahead of time, you get to think about how great that meal is going to be, right? And the happiness hypothesis, Jonathan Haidt writes, that we are actually bad at what he calls effective forecasting, that is predicting how we'll feel in the future. So we might overblow how good that meal is going to be. We're really bad at considering how it is. But the good news is, and we'll probably talk about this more a little later, but the good news is that we don't actually remember what exactly we were feeling when we were eating fine foods and drinking fine wines. We just remember the experience as pleasurable or not pleasurable afterward. Haidt goes on to write about people with baseline happiness, because we all have a like a middle of the road, like right where we are, how happy we are most of the time. Did you win the lottery, lose control of your limbs? What do you think? Within a year, lottery winners and paraplegics have both, on average, returned most of the way to their baseline levels of happiness. It's crazy, huh? Like I said, Gilbert writes that we're much better at recalling our feelings, not what got us to those feelings. If we didn't like the wine or we did like the pie, we remember that we didn't like the wine or we did like the pie, not what we didn't like about the wine. We don't remember the texture. We don't remember the taste. We don't remember how good that pie felt touching our tongue. We just remember, oh, good pie, bad wine. Anticipation often gives us deeper feelings than achievement. Set for yourself any goal you want, Haidt writes, and we mentioned this last week. Most of the pleasure will be had along the way, with every step that takes you closer. The final moment of success is often no more thrilling than the relief of taking off a heavy backpack at the end of a long hike. So when you hit those milestones, that's where you get your little hit. Anticipating unknown pains is scarier than known ones, even if known ones are more intense. Dan Gilbert writes about this. Yeah, fear, worry, and anxiety have useful roles to play in our lives. We motivate. Well, that must have been Freudian. Fear, worry, and anxiety have useful roles to play in our lives. We motivate ourselves by imagining the unpleasant tomorrows that await us should we decide to go light on the sunscreen and heavy on the eclairs. In short, he continues, we sometimes imagine dark futures just to scare our own pants off. We really do want control, as we talked about last week. Gilbert points out that we will pay a fortune to people who say they can predict the future, like psychics and weather forecasters and investment bankers, so that we can feel like we have some control over what's coming. To wind up, we'll talk a little bit about exceptions. Gilbert writes about people with prefrontal lobe damage. Damage to the prefrontal lobe can make people calm, but it wipes out their ability to plan. In the lab, this means not being able to solve mazes or puzzles, but in the real world, they can't discuss what they're going to do that afternoon. Planning and anxiety are intimately connected to thinking about the future. So, people with damage to the prefrontal lobes, they're not so anxious, pretty chill about stuff, but they also can't make dinner plans. Can't tell you the future, just seems hypothetical to them. A person with frontal lobe damage has no concept of the future of subjective time and is living in what Gilbert calls a permanent present. Such an existence is so difficult for most of us to imagine that we are tempted to dismiss it as a fluke, an unfortunate, rare, and freakish aberration brought on by traumatic head injury. In fact, it's not an aberration. In the animal kingdom, it's the norm. We are the only animal that thinks about the future. Our happiness isn't now, it's about how we feel about later. And we're not going to be happy when later becomes the present. It's all in the anticipation. Next time, we're going to talk a little bit about what actually makes us happy, and we're going to talk about some little miscellaneous tidbits picked up along the way as well. It's a pretty interesting subject, happiness is. In the meantime, be who you are. Be who you want to be. Have a wonderful day. Have a wonderful week. We'll catch you next time.
Thank you for listening. Get show notes and more at betterhumanhood.com. Leave us a rating and review wherever you listen to podcasts. And have yourself a wonderful day.